Welcome to Thrive Deeper, an ongoing conversation with Dr. Matthew Jacoby, author of the Thrive Bible Reading Guides, teaching pastor, and leader of the Psalmist band Sons of Korah. Join us as we go deeper into the Bible, discussing the passages as we read them together with Thrive. Now here's your host, DJ Payne.
G'day and welcome to episode 25 of Thrive Deeper. It is I, DJ Payne, and on this week's episode, Matt Jacoby and myself go through the rest of the book of Zechariah. Last week, we covered the first 6 or 7 chapters, and this week we are going through the rest. So be prepared, grab that Bible, and be ready to read along with us as we go through some pretty deep passages in the prophetic word of Zechariah. Now, we kick off this week's conversation. Matt and I were talking about his upcoming trip to Israel and what are the plans that he has around that. So listen in.
I didn't do a lot of those medieval traditional places because, just some random place, really.
Yeah.
I went mainly for the authentic spots.
Yeah. So how goes the planning for the Israel trip?
Oh, it's great. I've been doing so much research. I'm like a pig in mud, I tell you. Like months worth.
When do you have time to do extra research?
It's like instead of watching television, I'll just research all the archaeological sites and.
Okay, so
I've got so much out of it.
You're going over there January, February?
Yeah, and then probably the following year, and maybe even the following year after that as well, because I've got so many people keen to go. To go with me in 2020. Too many, in fact, and so I'll probably do another trip in 2021.
Well, I don't see this ever slowing down. I mean, there's always going to be more people wanting to go.
Yeah.
I guarantee when you have, you do the one in 2019, you do the one next year,
yeah,
you're going to come back and there's going to be, how many people are going with you?
With this time, this is just a pilot group, I'm calling it, which is 20
you're going to have 20 evangelists going out there when they come back here and saying everybody has to go.
Yeah. And look, I mean, it was interesting. When I went at the beginning of this year, I observed a lot of tours and I didn't really like the way that tours were being done. I felt like people were being a bit too smothered, Yep. So I've created a tour that gives sort of a lot of independence. So I provide a lot of stuff up front so that when people get there, they're already across it and you can just be there and absorb it, not just following the leader around.
Yes.
Which it just doesn't allow you to be in the moment.
So what you're telling me is you're not going to be wearing a yellow hazmat suit
and carrying a flag
and saying this way everybody.
No, exactly not. And
stopping and pulling out the guitar and playing a Sons of Korah song.
It's like go absorb and I'll be here So I think there's a lot of sites that I just think aren't worth necessarily visiting. I mean they're destinations for official pilgrimage generally by Catholic and Orthodox churches that really have no archaeological authenticity.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Just looking up researching Zechariah, the book that we're going through. I saw one of the points that I looked at was the burial site for Zechariah, which is a medieval burial site in the Mount on the Mount of Olives for the prophets. Blah blah blah. And it's like, he probably wasn't buried there, but this is where they just
that's
said.
right. No, that's what they've just said. Yeah, that's there. And then it gets sort of canonized as that, and archaeologists saying, well, we don't know where these people were buried. So a lot of time gets wasted on that sort of thing, I think. And, it was interesting when I was there, the guide, because it was just for a few pastors, and the guide was explaining how they normally do things, right? And, I'm thinking in the back of my head, I'm going to change this. She said, the thing with Australians is they always want to wander off, and they want to wander off and do things on their own. And I thought, yeah. So why, if they're paying 6,000 or 7,000 to do that, let them do that. Like
wander off.
Yeah, and so let's create a tour that incorporates a lot of wandering off.
So it's the Matthew Jacoby "Let's Wander Off" tour.
Wander off tour. Yeah,
I love it because knowing you how well I know you, I the antithesis of yourself would be on one of those Israeli tours where I couldn't imagine you on anything like that.
But I mean, the the group that I'm taking now, I mean, I've progressively fed information in the like over the last year.
Oh wow!
That's
So
right.
people who are going over
So
with
it's like
you
a 1-year Bible course.
That is a great way to do it.
And it culminates in now I'm refining that as I go now, as I
Yes.
said, and for next year it'll be more refined because I've produced a whole lot of material that I'll drip feed more the next time. So
Okay.
by the time people get there, it's like it's the climax,
the icing on the cake of everything that
being there.
Yeah, that is great.
So the idea is that like that when they get there and hop out at these points, they'll know just about as much as the guide.
Yeah. Good. That's great. Okay. Now, I know people are going to be listening they've never heard about this before because this has been very limited to our home church.
Yeah, that's right.
Is it ever going to be open to anybody else who might be listening to the podcast? Or if anybody was interested and wanted to put their name down, is it even worth saying get in touch with us, or is it more worth saying keep an eye on the Thrive Today website?
Yeah,
and
keep an eye on it. Yeah. It's a possibility.
Okay.
I mean, I love it,
Yeah.
and I'm going to do this for my church first, but let's see where it all goes.
Okay. Well, there we go. Keep an eye on the thrivetoday.net.au website, and if there's ever expands greater than our church family, which is the One Hope Baptist Churches in Geelong, then you'll be the first to find out about it.
All right.
All right, let's change gears and jump straight into Zechariah. We looked last week at the opening of the book of Zechariah. In fact, we got through pretty much the first 6 chapters.
Yep.
That pretty much leaves another 6 chapters to go to the end of Zechariah.
Well, a bit more because you need to do your maths there.
Okay, so
it goes to 14
It
chapters.
goes to 14. I'm thinking it goes to like
So
13.
pretty much half. Like we covered
Yeah.
half the book of Zechariah. Yeah.
And we've got the next part of the book of Zechariah to go. In our reading that we're doing at the moment, our current reading through Thrive, that takes us into next week as well. But in looking at what we're going to do, I think over this episode, I think we just cover off the rest of Zechariah, the book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting how I've had to renew. I mean, I've done research on this book before, and I've had to renew it because it's a very complicated book.
Definitely, even in the structure of how it's sort of the dreams. There's an introduction. There's all these crazy dreams that sort of
visions,
dreams and visions that loop around and connect with one another, and they sort of tie in. The earlier ones tie into the later ones, and then there's this break, and then we have this completely different voice. Yeah. Where he gives his prophecies about the coming of the Messiah, what's happening to Jerusalem at the end, which is I'm like, how does that connect to these dreams and the visions?
Well, it does connect thematically because all of the visions are speaking to the people of Israel in the returned exiles, who and it's assuring them, even though you're this tiny group of people sandwiched in between all of the nations. Yet don't be discouraged. God has a great purpose for you. You haven't been rejected. That's a big theme here.
Yes.
In a sense, what's happening in those first 6 chapters is that God, through Zechariah, is assuring his people that they are fully reinstated into their covenant status as a kingdom of priests.
Well, let's do a bit of an overview. If you're just jumping in for the first time, I recommend you go back and listen to the last couple of episodes at least. But we've got the exiled Jews coming back at around they're coming back at about
537 BC. Yeah,
and then 15 to 20 years after that, after they've already started being there, that's when Zechariah's ministry starts.
Yeah, that's right. So it's. They lay the foundation of the temple around 535, and there's about a 15-year break, because they stopped the temple building. This is the issue here. Yep. They've become discouraged. They've lost their sense of purpose, and in answer to this, God sends Haggai and Zechariah. Yep. And Haggai's prophecy is pretty straightforward.
Yep.
Come on, go up to the mountains,
chapters, done.
Bring down timber, build my temple, get your priorities right.
Yeah.
Okay?
And also in Haggai's book, we recorded that Zerubbabel and the team are like, okay.
Yeah, that's right. And they respond. That's great. And Zechariah is so much more complex. But it's still speaking to this same context, it's very positive.
Yes.
It's not positive about the history, the previous history.
No.
Because, of course, that's riddled with rebellion and so forth, but very much positive about the present and the future. And it's designed to encourage them to keep building. Although there's not a lot about build the temple.
Yes.
There is a bit in here,
Yeah.
but it's meant to be big picture stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So Zechariah is a contemporary of Ezra and Haggai, also of Malachi.
Hang on. Well, no. Remember, Ezra only turns up
Later on.
Yeah, like 50, nearly 60 years, 57 years, I think it is, after the temple is completed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he turns up way later.
Okay, so
he turns up actually in the time of Nehemiah.
Okay, so that's about 440.
But he's still.
No.
Oh no, you got me here.
Sorry. 450.
Yeah, it's around 450 something like that.
Okay. So this is the previous generation. Then let's get that straight. So as we're going through this, we've got the exiles coming back home, and with that first couple of waves, we have the story of Zerubbabel and the governors who are taking care of that. Talking to them were Haggai, and then overlapping from to the end of that era is Zechariah here.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
Because his ministry goes through to like about 475 BC or something like that. By the time he finishes writing all of his prophecies down.
I'm not sure what kind of time span he covers Zechariah, but he's there in the time of Zerubbabel and Joshua.
Yes,
he's contemporary with Haggai, and before Ezra gets there.
Okay, before Ezra, well and truly before Nehemiah, and before Malachi as well.
That's right.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's have a look at it. So he has an introduction that we covered off last week. We have a lot of his visions, and his in the first 9 chapters of the book.
No, first. It changes tack at about chapter 7.
Okay.
Really it goes 1 to 6 is
1 to 6
sequence of visions.
Okay, and then you've got a couple of middle chapters. 7, 8.
Yeah, that's right. So it addresses the situation. They've come back from exile. Zechariah puts a lot of emphasis on justice and mercy. Let's get this right.
Yes.
Don't fall just into empty ceremony. It says the word in 7 verse 8, and the word of the Lord came to Zechariah saying, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, render true judgments, show kindness, mercy to one another. Do not oppress the widow, the fatherless, sojourner, or the poor, and let none of you devise evil against another in your heart." So this is true worship, because remember, this is about they're building the temple, but don't think that just following all the rules and ticking the religious boxes is what this is all about. The reminder is to that true worship is doing the will of God and loving our fellow man. Verse 8 is an assurance. Chapter 8 is an assurance of God's favor towards his people and Jerusalem. He says in verse 3, "I have returned to Zion and will dwell in the midst of Jerusalem." And down in verse 8, you have this often repeated statement, "And they shall be my people and I will be their God in faithfulness and in righteousness."
Now there's a bit of a what Zechariah is saying there is, because I remember in those 2 chapters there, 7 and 8, part of that narrative is the people, the remnant who remembered, or were talking. They mentioned the old temple.
Yeah.
And they were sort of asking about, mourning about the old temple, and then there's the point of what this is what I took away from it. Yeah. Part of what Zechariah was sort of implying or saying, in those passages you just quoted, were the fact that don't be like the previous generation that had the better temple. Yeah. Now it's God wanting to have the real relationship with you. Yeah. This is not about you wondering about the past. It's you actually
that's right.
being in covenant with God right now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of this is vision casting. We've talked about visions, like literal visions in the first part of the book, but this is about vision casting, getting people to think big and recognize that they're actually that what they're doing is very small steps towards a very big universal purpose. 8:21 says, "The inhabitants of one city shall go to another, saying, 'Let us go at once to entreat the favour of the Lord and to seek the Lord of hosts.' I myself am going. Many people and strong nations shall come and seek the Lord of hosts in Jerusalem and to entreat the favour of the Lord." So there's this, that it's an echo of the vision of Isaiah, that nations will come to your light.
Yeah.
And it talks about Jerusalem here, but I think it becomes evident that this is a case of sort of multiple fulfillments, because it actually isn't just about Jerusalem. You will see as we go through this that Jerusalem actually becomes the eschatological Jerusalem, like the new Jerusalem that we read about in Revelation 21 and 22.
Definitely.
Later on in Zechariah, when he speaks about Jerusalem, he's referring to that Jerusalem,
Yes.
it seems.
Yes.
So, there's sort of multiple. There's sort of multiple fulfillments of that. It's Jerusalem as a symbol of God's dwelling place, of God's people. So this could be a picture of the church. Verse 23 here in chapter 8, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, in those days 10 men from the nations of every tongue shall take hold of the robe of a Jew, saying, 'Let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you.'" This is, because I think this is the time of the going out of the gospel.
Yes.
Ultimately this is, of course the first apostles were Jewish, and this is the time of the ingathering. Nations will come to your light, that bringing in of the nations in the church period. So I think, I think this did happen actually in history. As the Jews got established, that they attracted actually the elegant monotheism. Attracted actually a lot of people from the Greek and then Roman world, but they could never really become full members. It wasn't until the message of Christ opened up the covenant community to everyone that this really begins to be fulfilled. And then, of course, you've got the ultimate fulfillment in the new Jerusalem of Revelation 21 and 22.
So there's, again, once we see this over and over again, this is a pattern that we see in prophecy, especially, in the Old Testament prophecy, when it comes to do with Christ, the Messiah, and Jerusalem. There's varying levels and multiple layers of fulfillment.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm going to put it on you here, Matt. Like some people reading through it and going, okay, I think this is speaking pretty specific to the Jewish people.
Yeah.
Whether it is the temple being built or something for the future,
Yeah.
like it really is only Revelation. Where do you find the proof in the text that it's talking about the church or or this is about Christ and the new
Sure.
The new relationship?
Well, this comes as you go on.
Yes.
And I think as we go on, you'll see it's very evident. And the biggest indication is because there are these passages are actually quoted from in the New Testament, referring to just that. You know what I mean? So
that's
referring to Christ and His church, and even actually the New Jerusalem of Revelation 21 is actually a symbol of the people of God.
Yes,
as well. So that is the New Jerusalem. Is not just so much a city, but actually it's the bride of Christ.
Yeah, I love, as I was reading through Zechariah again for this study, I kept on a couple of times. I thought, the story that we read when Christ, the risen Christ, walks back with two disciples back to their home, and they don't recognize who he is
on the road to Emmaus.
on the road to Emmaus, and he just spends time opening up, quoting the Old Testament, talking about. These are all pointing to this guy, Christ. Yeah. I was reading through Zechariah going, I reckon Jesus on that road was quoting some of Zechariah.
Oh, I'm telling you, when I read through the second part of Zechariah again, there were times when I was getting goosebumps. I mean, it was just, oh, wow, really amazing prophecies, and the first. Of course, is the famous one in chapter 9, because the big issue for the post-exilic community, particularly after the death of Zerubbabel, and this may bridge beyond. I think probably Zechariah goes beyond Zerubbabel.
Yes, and the high priest Joshua.
Yeah, I think it looks like Zechariah's more of a splash in the pan. Sorry, Haggai's more of a splash in the pan, short prophecy. I think Zechariah extends further. But in any case, the big issue is about the reinstatement of the Davidic monarchy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The second Samuel chapter 7, the everlasting dynasty of David. I mean, where is this everlasting dynasty? I mean, Zerubbabel comes and goes, and this becomes an issue for the post-exilic community. And full restoration looks like the coming of the anointed one, or Mashiach, or Messiah, or the Christ in Greek. And so you get these, you get prophecies about this, and of course the famous one is here in Zechariah 9, which says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion; shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall speak peace to the nations. He shall rule from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. As for you also, because of the blood of my covenant with you, I will set your prisoners free from the waterless pit." I mean, this is the coming of the kingdom of God. This is the universal rule of God's Messiah, and it's going to be a rule of peace. He comes to do this not on a war horse. You notice it says here, it's not coming on a war horse, but he's going to come riding on a donkey. So this is going to be a different kind of kingdom. And this is the big issue, of course, in the New Testament with the Jews' ability to recognize Jesus as their Messiah, because they are expecting a military figure, whereas a very clear reading of Zechariah 9 says, no, he's not coming on a war horse like Alexander the Great. And remember, actually, just before this is if I'm correct here, is a prophecy against Tyre, included here in Israel's enemies. And
verses 2 to 4.
That's right. And it was actually Alexander the Great that finally defeated Tyre. So Alexander the Great is like the archetypal horse-mounted ruler that goes and prophesied, of course, in the book of Daniel. The archetypal warrior, but the Messiah is going to be different to that. There's a contrast being created here. As it says here, I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem. That's not going to be the way that we're going to do it. He's going to come riding on a donkey. So I think that is just remarkable. And of course, that evokes the triumphal entry of Jesus as he rode in to Jerusalem on a donkey to fulfill this scripture.
It's amazing over these, and it's almost like I remember. We're not going to get into. I had someone write to us in the last couple of weeks and ask us about. From listening to our podcast, they've gone and done their own research, and they came to him and they said, "I've got a very important word I want you guys to define, and that's dispensationalism." And I said, no, we're not going to go down that road again. That's its whole own podcast there. But I remember growing up in a church that was very dispensationalist. And basically, to cut a very long story short, it's that desire that I believe a very God-given desire for men to be, for men and women to be able to rightly divide the word of God, to be able to put things in its place and to work out how God is dealing with mankind at a certain time. I don't believe it's as cut as dry as some of the charts on the wall would like to make it bat out. But I remember in Zechariah, the last parts of Zechariah, I remember being taught very early on that this last half of Zechariah, 9 to 14, is split in two halves. It's this half deals with Christ on his first coming, and the second couple of the last couple of chapters is Christ coming, the final time, type of thing. And reading through it again, I was like, oh boy, no, I can't cut it. It's so progressive and bleeds into each other.
Yeah, it does.
And the ultimate fulfillments of some of these things, even riding on the horse, it's like, some of the prophecy, even the things that were quoted in the New Testament writers are like, oh, no, we leave out that line because that's not fulfilled just yet. That's happening at another time.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm like, it's not as cut and dry.
There's a concertina effect that happens with prophecy. I think this is a good way to put it. And if you imagine, a concertina, where when it's retracted
or
you
an
know, it's pulled
accordion,
together.
or an accordion,
accordion,
yeah.
right? You can pull it out, right? And that's history as it is, right?
Yes.
But in prophecy, it collapses, right? It retracts back into one flat thing, and it's described as though it's all one thing.
Yeah.
But in fact, as we step into history, the concertina gets pulled out, and you realise that things that in prophecy look like they belonged right together
Yes.
are actually now pulled apart
And
as history goes.
Yeah.
So from the view of the prophet,
Yeah.
it's a collapsed concertina. It's a retracted
That's a great way to describe it.
concertina. But from the point of view of being in history, it's a it's an extended concertina.
It's like a flat version of events.
Yeah.
You know, from one angle, you come up above it and you see it's actually
That's
quite
right.
deep.
Yeah.
And there's a 3D,
That's
depth
right.
to it
yeah.
all.
So there are these prophecies about the chapter 10, about the restoration of Israel and Judah, and this is a big and important theme here, because God is promising that He will uphold them and give them strength as long as they keep doing His will. You just focus on doing what I want, and I will restore you and give you strength, because it all seems so impossible to this beleaguered, tiny little group of people.
Yeah.
It's like God wants to assure them, I'm going to raise you up. Just keep at it.
Yeah.
Keep stepping in there. Then we get into the infinitely complicated chapter 11, and I read something, a scholar who described this as the most complicated chapter in the Bible. That's a big call.
I'll put it up there. I mean, along with, there's parts of Daniel that are pretty complicated.
Yeah, that's right.
This one is not mathematically complicated. It's like the phraseology is so weird.
Yeah.
And the way that it almost changes mid-sentence into looking at a different angle is so bizarre. But once you break it all down, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, so basically what happens in chapter 11 is that Zechariah is called to enact something. Now there's an issue in this. There's actually a few different interpretations of this. Some think he's basically called to be a shepherd, to become the shepherd of the flock, and to get rid of three evil shepherds. And so, some people think that this may perhaps literally happen. There's some who have said maybe Zechariah actually, after Zerubbabel became the leader of the post-exilic community, and had to depose others, that this is part of that. Now, that's not a particularly prominent interpretation. I think that the most probable suggestion here is that in classic prophetic fashion, Zechariah is to take the place of God. Just like Hosea, divorce, takes on an adulterous wife, and he plays the part of God.
Yeah.
Essentially what's happening here is that God is saying to Zechariah, okay, Zechariah, I want you to play the part of me. Okay, so it says, thus said the Lord my God, become shepherd of the flock doomed to slaughter. Now, doomed to slaughter, not in the future, but that have been continually given over to slaughter in the past, right? Those who buy them slaughter them and go unpunished, and those who sell them say. So they've been cast around in the midst of the nations.
Resold.
Even by their own shepherds who have turned against them and made deals with other nations. And, it says, and their own shepherds who have no pity on them. So they've just been badly shepherded, right?
Yep.
Badly shepherded by foreign nations who have just plundered them, badly shepherded by their own shepherds. And also, so God, and this includes going, right, this is a retelling of Israel's history.
Yes.
So you think of Egypt, and under the shepherding of Egypt, how they were plundered, and so God becomes their shepherd, but they reject their shepherd. And so God gives them over to the nations. And so this is Zechariah is called to act this part of the shepherd, and it possibly not literally, because there are some things here that he couldn't have done, possibly in a literal sense. So in 1 month I destroyed 3 shepherds, so some of this perhaps may have symbolically been enacted or something like that. It's difficult to say how this was enacted, but that's a prophetic kind of thing to do. He says, so in verse 7, I became shepherd of the flock, doomed to be slaughtered by sheep traders, and I took 2 staffs. I named one favour and the other named union. And these two staffs are going to be broken, right? Because the union between the north and the south tribes are broken. That's after the time of Solomon. And then and favour gets broken as well, because they had received so much favour from God but rejected it. And so the staff of favour gets broken.
And it's that idea of, let me just jump in and say early on, the idea that the sheep that Zechariah is called to care for is turning against him as he plays the Lord is an idea that sort of doesn't come clearly out at the beginning. And that's what can stumble a lot of first-time readers, because right at the beginning when he says, likewise, I will give these, I'll give the sheep over, you're like, hang on, I thought he's supposed to be protected. Like, it's a bit confusing. But the point of this, the bigger picture, you sort of got to zoom out and say, the point of this is he is showing that the Messiah will be rejected by the sheep.
Yeah, that's right.
The sheep of the Jews, the Jewish nation, and they will reject their ultimate salvation.
Yeah, that's right. And we're coming to that. But the point here is that they really had already rejected their shepherd.
Yeah.
And so are rejected, are sent off really by their shepherd, who is God. And Zechariah is playing the part of God's here. So it says, in 1 month I destroyed the 3 shepherds. There were times in Israel's history where there was such a rapid succession of kings who just killed each other. Or 1 month could be just stand for a relatively short time and be talking about the last days of the southern kingdom, the last days of Judah. Because actually it was within an 11-year period. There were 3 kings that came and went, and that led to the end. And it could be actually talking about that last, the destruction of those shepherds.
Yep.
And then it says here, let me read down, and then it says here in verse 12, and this is an interesting one. So I know it's been a little complicated, but if you're listening, keep listening.
Yep.
It says, verse 12, then I said to them, if it seems good to you, give me my wages, but if not, keep them. So this is God speaking to his people. Yeah. And I know this is complicated, but he's saying, I've shepherded you all of this time, and I'm done, right? Yeah. So give me my wages.
Yeah. Whatever you think I'm worth.
Whatever you think I'm worth, right? And this is going to be what do you think I'm worth? Because you've sort of given me up, Yeah. But if not, keep them. And they weighed out as my wages 30 pieces of silver. 30 pieces of silver.
Where have you heard that before?
That's right. Well, Jesus was given up for 30 pieces of silver by Judas.
Yeah.
And
again, by the religious leaders of Jerusalem who rejected him as the shepherd.
Yeah, that's right. That exactly. So, now the importance of the 30 pieces of silver, this is actually how you made up for this is the price of a slave. If a slave gets maimed or something, according to the Old Testament law. And it's not any reflection on the inherent value of a slave, but basically what this is saying is that you have considered me worth nothing more than a slave, really, than the price of a slave. Yep. So that I think is the key thing here. And he says, then the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter. The lordly price at which I was priced by them. That's sarcastic. The lordly price. Throw it into so that the potter's section is really this could be the treasury of the temple, which in the case of Judas it was. He cast it back in the end, he cast it back into the temple.
Yeah.
But this could be something like the scrapyard, or as well, because there were sections where potters would be in the temple because it required the temple ceremonies required these pots.
Yes.
And in fact, if you go to Shiloh, where the tabernacle originally was, the pottery of hundreds of years is still there. It's all over. I was walking over the top of it.
Yeah.
All of this pottery. So it's like the potter. It's, imagine a scrapyard. It's like throw it onto the scrap heap, really, because it's worth nothing. Like this is what you think I'm worth. Now, this is what you've given me up for.
Yeah. Is there any allusion to this? Because we know in the story of Judas and the 30, the ultimate demise of Judas, where he kills himself.
Yeah.
The place where he killed himself.
Yeah.
Was the potter's field.
That's right.
Is there an allusion to that, or did it get named for that because of this?
There is. I think there is a connection. I mean, it's a difficult connection in that it's a little bit oblique, but I think, and also remember, it's so happened that they bought this field with the 30 pieces of silver. Yeah. This is moving forward to the time of Christ.
Yes.
Christ was betrayed by Judas for 30 pieces of silver. He threw it back into the temple. They purchased, I mean, in the original prophecy, it was thrown into the potter's house, right, where the potters were. Yeah. In the New Testament, he tosses it back at the
and the religious leaders are like, we don't want this blood money.
Yeah, we don't want this blood money. Yeah. So they buy a field that happens, not coincidentally, I would say, to belong to the potter. Yeah. It's the potter's field.
Wow.
And that becomes a place for burial for Judas.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the sorts of historical coincidences that you just can't make happen, and the writer of the New Testament notes that. So the 30 pieces of silver thing is quite an amazing connection. And then I mean, it just gets so much more interesting. I mean, it's amazing, this section, because then it says in verse 15, then the Lord said to me, take once more the equipment of a foolish shepherd, for behold, I am raising up in the land a shepherd who does not care for those being destroyed or seek the young or heal the maimed or nourish the healthy, but devours the flesh of the fat ones. So there's a... I'll read from one commentary which says, now there can be no doubt that the orientation is exclusively future in both historical and eschatological terms. So he's, up to this point in the vision, he's described the case, he's described things in the past, but here he now is very much looking to the future. So he goes on to say, this means that some figure after Zechariah must be sought. But he says that very search is encumbered with a host of problems. It is best perhaps to see in the shepherd the whole collective leadership of Israel from Zechariah's time forward, culminating at last in that very epitome of godless despotism, the individual identified in the New Testament as the Antichrist.
Yeah.
This is the sort of ultimate, God says, okay, you want to go this way? Then I'm going to give you leaders that reflect that. Yep. And the Antichrist is the ultimate getting what we deserve, getting the leader that we deserve.
Yeah, yeah. And that, like you say, to bring it back to that concertina or accordion or flattening of history when it comes to the future, the type of thing. We go from literally... From one verse, Zechariah has been called by God to play the role of the Messiah shepherd. Yeah. To the next verse, put on that outfit again. This time you're playing the
that's right.
The evil opposite,
that's right. Yeah.
Type of thing. And you're like, hang on, how does this fall in? Yeah.
So there's these two polar opposites. There's Yahweh the good shepherd.
Yes.
And then there's the bad shepherd, this Antichrist figure.
Yeah.
And Antichrist meaning the opposite of Christ, who is the good shepherd. Yeah. So that picture is already being painted here in Zechariah chapter 11. And then and then he declares a woe upon this shepherd. Woe to my worthless shepherd who deserts the flock. May the sword strike his arm and his right eye. And so it declares a curse on this shepherd. But God has allowed this to arise because sometimes we need to get what we ask for to know that it's wrong. Yeah. And ultimately, history culminates in the world getting what it wants. It's like this is not just someone coming from the outside and imposing. No, this is like this. The Antichrist could be this could arise in a democracy. This is people getting really what they want. So, so chapter 12, focuses on the coming. This coming salvation. God is constantly punctuating this with 12 verse 7, and the Lord will give salvation to the tents of Judah first, and the glory of the house of David, and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem. So there is these prophecies, and then says something very, very interesting here in verse 10 of chapter 12. It says, "And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy, so that when they look on me, on him whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only child and weep bitterly over him as one weeps over a firstborn," right? So God's saying, there's going to come a time where I'm going to pour out my spirit on the house of David, on my people, which is Judah, the people of Judah, and the Jews. And when they look on me whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him, right? Now, this is really interesting, and this has been noted in the commentaries. I mean, never does God say of himself, like the language here is the one that they've killed. Now, this is God saying this of himself, right? So this causes problems in interpretation. Hang on a minute. How can God be killed? Yeah. Well, as we know, God came to us in Jesus Christ, in human flesh, so that he could be killed, so that he could be the sacrifice to take away sins. And so it goes on to say, on that day there shall be a fountain open for the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from sin and uncleanliness.
It's amazing.
Oh, would you just look at that? Like, this is incredible stuff, And again, it's looking forward hundreds of years to something that's about to happen.
Well, and even in some of the language in chapter 12, it's again that multi-layers of it's looking ahead to that final fulfillment when Christ finally comes, at the end of the age and takes it all. It's so multi-layered and beautiful in that. It's
I think this is and if I go forward here, I think this is possibly looking forward to a time when literally God's original covenant people, the Jews, as in literally the house of David, will mourn for the one whom they have pierced. And this is, if we go forward a little bit into chapter 13, in line with this, because remember he's saying that that he will be pierced, right? And so then you see in 13 verse 7, the prophecy, "Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who stands next to me." Okay, so this isn't the bad shepherd. I mean, what's going on here? This is the good shepherd, right? But God has identified himself with the good shepherd. Remember, Zechariah is playing the part of God. And yet now it's saying that, "Awake, O sword, against my shepherd." And now he's distinguishing the shepherd somehow from himself, against the man who stands next to me, or you could understand the man at my right hand, the one at the right hand of God. And it goes on. Let me just see if there's anything. So let me quote one commentator here who says this. He asks the question, who is the shepherd? Well, the prophet is not explicit. had he wished, he could have drawn together the Davidic theme with that of the shepherd, but he did not do so. Nor did he identify the shepherd with the servant of Isaiah, chapter 53, though it is likely that he had that passage in mind. Most probably did. The very fact that the passage is to a degree enigmatic is an invitation to meditate on it. And there are indications that it influenced the thinking of Jesus more than any other shepherd passage in the Old Testament. Now, what does Jesus say? He says, I am the shepherd. I lay down my life for the sheep. And it goes on to say, strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. And of course, that is quoted from in Matthew chapter 26. Jesus himself interprets this verse.
Yeah.
I mean, there are not many occasions where Jesus himself, I mean, there's a number, but, this is Jesus himself saying, it says, then Jesus told them, this very night, on the night of his crucifixion, you will all fall away on account of me, for it is written, on the night of his trial. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. This is what's going to happen. So this is prophesied, and then it says, it talks about in the whole land, declares the Lord, 2/3 shall be cut off and perish, and 1/3 shall be left alive. And I will put this third into the fire and refine them as one refines silver. So it predicts after this striking of the shepherd, the sheep shall be scattered through the nations. Now, if this is talking about the Jewish people, this is right on. Yeah. Because this is exactly what happened. We've seen. And if you read verse 8 and verse 9, and I will put this third into the fire, it predicts this prolonged time of trial. And then it says, they will call upon my name and I will answer them. I will say they are my people, and they will say the Lord is my God. Now, when Paul talks about his heart for his people, in Romans 9 to 11.
Yes.
He is holding on to a promise that God is going to save his people. He's holding on to a promise of God that for his own people, the Jewish people, that God's not finished with them yet. And I think it's sections like this that he has in mind.
Oh, 100%.
That depict them being scattered, that depict the suffering, and that also depict a time when they will call upon the name of the Lord.
Yeah.
And they will come back.
Yeah.
And receive Jesus as their Messiah.
Now, to wrap it up, we go to chapter 14, which wraps up in this beautiful vision of the future when the Lord is actually ruling the earth.
Yeah.
There is there's a whole new Jerusalem. There's nations coming and going. It's an amazing picture.
Well, first of all, there's a great battle here, isn't there?
Yeah.
Behold, a day is coming for the Lord. Now, when in classic prophetic fashion, when they speak of the day of the Lord, it's this day of judgment. And this is Zechariah is doing this. And he says, verse 2, for I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle. This is Revelation 19. This is the battle of Armageddon. And the city shall be taken and the houses plundered and so forth. And it talks about on that day, his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem to the east on the mount. Now, now, the interesting thing is the way that this is spoken about. I mean, let's keep in mind Jesus' conversation about the end times. Mm-hmm. That is known as. Do you remember what it's? I don't know if you where Jesus gives this talk in Matthew 24 and 25 about the end times. Now, where was he when he gave this talk? Do you remember?
It was on the Mount of Olives.
On the Mount of Olives.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not, seriously. He chooses the Mount of Olives, because they asked the question about the temple in the Temple Mount. Right, I just shelve that. Let's go for a walk. Yeah. We're going to go right up to the Mount of Olives. We're going to stand there, and then he gives them this talk about the things that leading up to the end times, and then the end times themselves, and it's right there in the Mount of Olives. So. That in itself is significant. And then he says, on that day, after all of evil has been vanquished, and he says, on that day, living waters shall flow out from Jerusalem. This is Revelation chapter 22, and I saw the river of the water of life flowing from the throne of God and the Lamb down the middle of the great street of the city, right?
Yeah.
And out, in is it here where it talks about? It's in actually connecting also with Ezekiel.
Yes, the
The
end
final
of Ezekiel.
chapters of Ezekiel also have this picture of this river,
Yeah.
the river of God flowing out of the temple and into the Dead Sea and bringing life to the Dead Sea.
Like this picture of like a new Eden almost
that's right.
coming apart. And, in Ezekiel it finishes off and saying, the name of the place is God with you.
that's right.
This is what,
Yeah.
and we get the same thing here.
That's right, yeah.
Looking at.
And so this is Ezekiel's final visions of the temple, where he says half of them, the waters flowing into the eastern sea. The eastern sea is the Dead Sea, and half of them to the western sea, which is the Mediterranean Sea. And in the final vision of Ezekiel, the waters bring life to the Dead Sea. It's a beautiful vision there.
Yeah.
It says in verse 9, "And the Lord will be king over all of the earth. On that day, the Lord will be one, and his name will be one." And there's this beautiful visual, Jerusalem shall dwell in security, verse 11. Verse 14, "And the wealth of all the surrounding nations shall be collected and brought to, and they shall go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts." I mean, it's Revelation chapter 22 all over. It's just glorious the way that this book progresses right to the end.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing finish, and it's not and there's disturbing elements all the way through to it as well. There's one
as there is in Revelation.
Yeah.
Because it's polarized. This is the thing. As we move towards the end, dark becomes more polarized from light, right?
Yeah.
The brighter the light, the darker the shadows.
Yeah.
So as we move towards the end, it's not just things will get worse because they get better because of the coming of God's kingdom, and there's this effect in Revelation that you see this more and more evil, but that's but against the more and more of God's coming until this climax is in the final defeat of darkness.
Yeah. Hey, can I recommend a couple of things in when you're dealing, especially in these last few chapters of Zechariah? In the past, we've talked about different Bible translations before.
Yeah,
I would go through this with a couple of different translations in here.
Yeah.
I found heading through this with the New Living Translation, though it is a tiny bit interpretive. I found it a lot more clear.
Yeah.
The ESV is really choppy. It's really word for word. It can be quite confusing.
Yeah, the ESV, I guess, reflects the difficulty when biblical scholars talk about this as being one of the most complex parts of the Bible.
Yeah.
That's in the Hebrew, and actually our translators have done a lot of work for us.
Yes.
So it's actually more complicated even than it seems to us.
Yes.
Because they're having to make translation choices. The ESV, I mean, I use the ESV, which is the more literal translation, but it is more difficult. Incidentally, I should say that the Thrive app is going to have the ESV attached to it.
Beautiful.
If you want to listen to Thrive.
Yes.
Sorry, I think if you want to, I forget how it's working, but anyway, we've got permission to use the ESV along with the Thrive.
The red letter thing there, the thing to note there is an app coming for Thrive.
There is an app coming for Thrive.
So stay tuned there. Now, as we wrap up this episode, it wouldn't be right. I stumbled as I was reading through. I ended up reading this passage about 4 times, and I was like, "This is
which one?
This is bizarre." Chapter 13.
Okay, yep.
The beginning of chapter 13, and pick it up from say the end of verse 2.
Yeah.
He says, "I will remove from the land both the false prophets and the spirit of impurity that came with them."
Yeah.
If anyone continues to prophesy, this is the false prophet. He's talking about false prophets here. If anyone continues to prophesy falsely, his own father and mother will tell him, "You must die. For you have prophesied lies in the name of the Lord." And as he prophesies, his own father and mother will stab him. And on that day, people will be ashamed to claim the prophetic gift, this false prophecy. No one will pretend to be a prophet by wearing prophet's clothes. He will say, "I'm not a prophet. I'm a farmer. I began working for a farmer as a boy." Right. And if someone asks, "Hey, what about those stab wounds on your chest?" he will say, "I was wounded at a friend's house." What? That is the most bizarre passage. I stopped and went, "Hang on, what have I just read?" Went back and read it again, I'm like, this is so part of it is funny, part of it is strange, part of it is really drastic of how God sees these false prophets in the land.
I thought I was going to get away without.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. There's some, again, we like to try to match it up to certain events in history. Yeah. I don't know where this one is.
Okay, look, and I think this is a good. I think that's a really good question. And first of all, big picture. Let's remember that the big problem of the human condition, throughout the Old Testament, in fact, in Paul's diagnosis of the human problem in Romans chapter 1, verse 18 and following, it's not primarily a moral problem. It's a problem of idolatry. Yeah. It's not letting God be God, but having other things before God. And this is predicting a time where people wouldn't dare. Yeah. Right, they wouldn't dare, and where there's going to be such a turning away from this that even those who have been prophets will not even want to admit that they even. It's like, so the wounds, for example, are probably the wounds inflicted because ancient prophets of ancient Eastern religions would wound themselves and give themselves scars, as part of invoking the gods. So they're going to say, "Oh, yeah, it just happened because I was whatever, from I received this from my mates or something."
Yeah, exactly.
So they're making it. So it's actually going to be a matter of shame, to even be associated with this. This is poetic, right? It's like, it's not. It's trying to paint a picture of how very ashamed.
Yeah. Oh, it's a vivid picture. It's a
big a no-no
picture.
This would be that even if it were to exist, and the whole point here is that it won't.
Yes.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
But if it were, then even parents would be willing to kill their own children. It's that it becomes that shameful. Now, I mean that's really dire. And actually, I mean, there is a Deuteronomic injunction that to this effect, actually, probably not ever carried out. That about the stoning of the
false prophets.
Of the false prophets, even if they're your children. It's like the point of that is to underscore how incredibly bad this is, right? Because the fact is that by worshipping these false gods, they were going to sacrifice their children to them anyway. Generations of children. So, this drastic talk about stoning, these false prophets, those who turn to idols, even if they're your own children, in Deuteronomy, that's, as I said, probably never actually practiced, but it was the ultimate, no, just don't go there. Yeah. Now, it is harsh, but I as I read this, I thought, doesn't that mirror, when Jesus, for example, says in Luke chapter 14, he says, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." Yeah. And he is saying, your love for me must be so great, and your loyalty to me must be so great that compared with your relationships, and he's facing a situation where families will be split, actually, because one, by turning to Christ, will make themselves an enemy of the rest of his family, who will put lots of pressure on him to turn away from Christ. Yeah. And Jesus is saying, you need to be so loyal to me, you're prepared to become the enemies of your family. Yeah. And this is similar to what's happening here.
It's funny.
See, Jesus, he doesn't really want anyone to hate their mother. But he's saying, he's making a point, and I would say that this prophecy in Zechariah about, the parents and being prepared to to execute even their children, is meant to make a similar sort of point. It's like it's like a literary prophetic sort of device to make a point very, very boldly.
It just hit home again to me about how, and this is a personal thing for me, especially as we do this podcast. I sat here when I was reading it, and again, and went, "Oh my goodness, this is what God thinks about people who say lies in His name." Yeah, this is what He sees it as. It's drastic. It's pretty drastic.
Good point. Yeah,
and I sort of went, man, I got to be careful, not only with my language and when I'm speaking for God, but also I sort of took it away and went, do I glorify in things that I shouldn't be glorifying in? especially about mistakes that I've made or things that I've done. I had a few different thoughts around it. It sort of weighed heavily on me. And it's just, again, one of those passages where at first I was like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And as I went on, I was like, hang on, I think this actually has application in my life right now.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is really, really serious because, of course, up to this point in history, it was the false prophets that misled the people. It was the prophets that told them what they wanted to hear. Not the ones that corrected them, but the ones that just told them all, and that misled them, that led them off to the gods of, the nations. And this is a really, really serious issue. And I think when we come to passages that seem harsh, maybe they seem harsh to us because we think, oh, come on, calm down. Like it's not that serious. And no, but that's the point.
It is.
It is that serious. It is that serious. And, misleading people is that serious. Worshipping anything other than God and being drawn and led to worship other things, it just is that serious. And this is polarizing things. God wants to polarize things. These are black and white issues. This is really serious, and God wants the black to be black. And these verses that seem harsh to us, I think we need to stop grappling with what they're saying and think about what can this do for me? Well, I think this can wake us up. This can make us see, oh, no, actually, this is really serious. And what do we think we're dealing with? We're talking about God here. We're talking about God's absolute claim upon us. To be in conflict with God is of infinite, eternal magnitude. Of course it's serious. There's nothing more serious than this. So there's no calming down and just, can you just tone it down a bit? This is a little harsh. Well, it is harsh. When we turn against God, that's the harshest thing in the universe. But what we need to remember is that God has borne all of the harshness of evil, all of the harshness of judgment upon himself in Jesus Christ, taken all of that so he can give us the opportunity to begin again. And ultimately, that is the greatest expression of who God is, what God was prepared to do in Jesus Christ to reconcile us to himself. And throughout the prophetic books, this theme of the love of God, I know there's harsh stuff there, but it's the theme of the love of God and God's desire for restoration that dominates through every page.
Oh, do you feel, I don't know, is it just me? Do you feel as exhausted as I feel after going through all that rest of Zechariah in one big hit? Boy, oh boy, there's so much there. And this is part of the, the bittersweet part of flying through this at the clip that we do to get through the Thrive reading plan that we, some things that we'd love to spend a lot more time in, we just have to go on past. But that's all right. We have putting the book of Zechariah behind us. So next week, we want your questions. What have been your questions as you've been going through the book of Zechariah over the last couple of weeks? Please let us know. You can get all the links on how to contact us next from Benita, the voiceover lady. We'll also be getting into a little bit of Esther and Ezra. So if you've got questions around that, please get in contact with us. We love your questions. Well, until next week, this has been DJ Payne for the whole gang saying thrive.
Thank you so much for listening to Thrive Deeper. We value all our listening community. If you are on Facebook, search and like Thrive Today page to get all of our latest updates. Our music is provided by the talented Rod Gear. For more information, head to rodgearmusic.com. The podcast is recorded at the studios of Geelong Christian Media Incorporated, then edited and produced by DJP.FM. Join the conversation online with nearly 400 other listeners at facebook.com/groups/Thrive Deeper. Our home on the internet is at thrivetoday.net.au. There you can subscribe to the Thrive Daily Reading Guide and contact us directly. That's at thrivetoday.net.au. Until next time, thrive.